Okay, this is a much more important concept, which again, very unfortunately, is the PLC doesn't teach that in high school history, and that is actually in China, we have two kinds of Chinese. We have internal Fu Ming, okay, internal people. Fu literally means this thing over here, okay? So that's internal people. They are counted by individual persons. And then they are the real Chinese provinces like Shandong and Jiangsu and whatever. And then they have border people, Bianming, okay? So French people, they are counted by households, okay? And then among the Bianming, okay, among the Bianming will be the Tibet 39 tribe. And these are the ethnic rulers, and there are 4,889 households. Now, it's very clear in the Chinese books that Tibet's 39 tribe does not belong to Tibet. It's actually sort of in the boundary area between Qinghai and Tibet and Sichuan, okay? And you can see that there are only 4,889 households, so obviously it's not really the real Tibet. And then, of course, they even include places like this place, okay, in today's Tuva Republic, Ming tributary tribe, 768 households. Okay, these are all included. Okay, so they have two kinds of people, and but the Tibetans were never counted as either the core people, the internal people, nor the border people. Okay? Now you have this also, and that's on the reverse page. If you could look at that, that is to further prove that China was never able to get any population records or even population figures from Tibet. Okay? So we have really looked at this one. Remember? The Great Qing Comprehensive Record, Jiaqing. And then you can see that, for example, for Shandong province, for a regular province of China, then you can see that through the years, they have kept population figures. So these are the publication date of these authoritative publications. And then you can see, well, the population figures, of course, they increase through the years, okay, which is natural. Yeah? And for this one, which is now in the Tuva Republic of Russia, again, you can see that they kept figures even for a very small tribe. This one in the Jiaqing Comprehensive Record is 595, and then 768. In the Qing History Draft, no figure is given, but then there's a statement explicitly stating that by that time, this place has been taken over by Russia, therefore we have no records. In other words, they do mention that we don't provide any figures right now because it's no more part of China. Now, in contrast, Tibet 39 tribe, the 4889 remains constant. Okay, I'll go into that in a little bit detail. Basically, what happened was that for some reason they got this figure, okay, about these people, and they were never able to update it. They were actually able to update the figure of this tribe, a very small tribe, okay, in Russia. But for these, they were not able to update it. But they still put it inside their books because they just still want to claim that it's part of China, so they have the figures. Okay, but again, please note that even for the French people, like the Tibet 39 tribes, please note that they don't put it in the geography section; they put it in the military section. That is to indicate that the authors of the Qing history draft, they were trying to be honest. In other words, they have pressure from the government to sort of pretend as if this is part of China, okay? But you see that they don't even have the right figures. So they consciously, in good conscience, realize that they cannot be put into geography because remember the 2,500-year tradition is to put the census figures and the taxation figures in the geography section. But then for this, they don't put it in the geography section, they put it in the military section just to sort of, as a compromise. But this, remember, is not for Tibet. That's even for an area that is in the border area of Tibet and Sichuan, you have this kind of a problem. Then, of course, what about Tibet? Well, there's just no Tibet. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Okay? Okay, so that's the review over here. We have inner people and then border people, and these are all subjects of the Qing Emperor. And the people in Tibetan areas controlled by the Kashag and Panchen Lama, which corresponds to the Tibetan autonomous region of today, was neither shown as inner people or border people. You know, it's just plain not Chinese. I mean, some people take it as an insult. I think the Tibetans would probably take it as a compliment. But your objection would be, well, there are figures, you just didn't find it. Okay, and again, as I said, it's very difficult for me to prove that something doesn't exist, right? I'm not claiming that they don't have the figures, and you can always claim that, well, they have the figures, okay? You just haven't found it, okay? Now, okay, there are two ways to defend myself. One is to say that, well, yeah, if you think that there exists, then why don't you show it to me? And the PRC government has never actually shown the figures, okay? So if they have the figures, they can show it. But there's actually a better way to prove that, okay? A more conclusive way to prove it is that the PRC's figures actually was just that, pardon me for saying this, the fabrication was just so ridiculous that it helps me to prove that these figures do not exist. And how do I prove it? That would be what I'm going to talk about, okay? Tibet population figures are actually given. They are actually given in China's authoritative Tibet references, okay? But that's how it's given. So the oldest one is actually in a book that's called Tibet Record. It has been republished many times, okay? In the PLC edition, it recognizes as anonymous. And it's not generally recognized that this book is anonymous, and also the publication date is also unclear. Okay, we don't know who wrote it, we don't know when it was published. It was just old manuscript, and there's this passage. Of course, this is a translation. The passage says, in 1737, compiled and submitted to Li Fanyuan for inclusion in unification record, blah, blah, blah. And then there are altogether common people, 121438 households, 302 lamas, the Panchen Lama rules over blah, 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 okay? So this is the sort of the data that is shown in the Chinese classical book. So I would like you to look at this table because the argument is a little bit difficult to follow, it's a little bit complicated. So I would like you to look at this, the second table over there. The second table, this one. In the line that says Tibet record, in the line that says Tibet record, the line, the year of completion is 1750. Do you see those figures? People is 121,438, and then the lamas is 302,560. Do you see that in the first row? Okay, and then similarly across the Panchen Lama, you see those figures in the first row? Everybody sees that, the table? Can you see that? Do you have extra copies for some of you who do not have the table? Okay, would you like to have a copy of the table? Okay, that's okay. Okay, fine. So this is the sort of the oldest record of Tibet population figures in a Chinese publication. Please remember that in this Chinese publication, we don't know the publication date. We also don't know the name of the author. Okay?
But the figures are constant.
What? That's my point. That is my point. But I haven't got to that yet. You have stolen my thunder, so to speak. Yes, that's actually what I'm trying to prove. You're absolutely right. Okay? You are absolutely right. That's the problem. So, okay, so this is the first row. I have summarized it, and this was the figure in a publication that's supposedly around 1750. Let's look at the second authoritative publication, Chinese publication, and that one is by, again, this is a very prestigious book. You can go into Duxiu and then look it up, Sheng Wu Ji, okay? And the PLC will just tell that this is a very patriotic book by a very patriotic author, okay? They defend, the integrity of Chinese territory, blah, 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 and so forth, okay? And so according to this thing, it says, governed by the Lama, again, so many Lamas and so many common people, governed by Panchen, blah, blah, blah. And if you look at those numbers, you can please verify that that is in the second row of the table, where it says over here, record of holy conquest, and then those are the figures. And as this gentleman has already sort of preceded my objective, you can see that they're basically the same. Right? Okay? And now if you look at the third one, which is, of course, the official history of China, okay? And that is the Qing history draft. And then that is not included in the geography section. Remember, I keep reminding you, okay, we follow traditional formats. Population figures should be placed in the geography section. But again, the authors over here, they have enough conscience to know that, hey, there's something wrong over here. They are embarrassed about this whole thing, but they still have to include it. So they put it in the fund region section, okay, which is 525, which is towards the end of the book. And then if you look at those figures, you can see that, well, again, basically they're the same. Yes, sir?
Professor, in the figures, 1,21,438 is Tibet record of holy conquests, and Qing history draft.
Yeah.
Biographies of Dalai Lamas, again 1,21,438, but they are mentioned as serfs.
Yeah, you haven't gotten to that yet. That's a funny part too. Yeah, but I haven't gotten to that. Well, that's it. One row at a time, okay? One row, yeah. So we are down to, yeah, again, you're trying to steal my thunder, okay? So, yeah. Yeah, later on you see, hey, something wrong, how come this serves, okay? But right now, we unfortunately, we're still at the third row, Qing history draft, right? So as this gentleman, as you pointed out, wait a minute. That would mean that over the 200 years, you have basically the same set of figures. And the same set of figures come from a book with an unknown author, with an unknown publication date, okay? So that actually proves pretty much that you really don't have any reliable figures. I don't know where the heck you get a figure from an anonymous book, and then you use it for 200 years. As compared to just what I showed you about all the other Chinese areas where they update the figures every 5 years or 6 years, even for a tribe, you know, with 500 people up in Russia, okay, they update it. For this one, that's all they have.
See, it's 1963. So the term.
No, I haven't come to that yet.
Yes.
Okay, again, please limit yourself to the first 3 rows. The fourth row, I haven't reached that part yet. Do you have any question about the first 3 rows? Yes.
You have mentioned area governed by Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
And other is governed by Panchen Lama.
Yeah.
So Dalai Lama area would be around Lhasa.
Yeah.
And Panchen Lama around Shigatse.
Yeah.
So these two were independent to each other?
I don't know. That's what the author is saying. I'm just showing you the records. It's frankly, I think the whole bunch of it is probably made up because I don't know where they get the records from, okay? But what I'm showing is that these records are reused even by the official history of China, which is the Qing history record, and that's used. I'm just showing the records. I'm not trying to defend it. There's no reason why I will defend it, and I don't want to defend it. I don't know where they got it from. And you are right, okay? You can question about the separation. Why do you have separate figures? I don't know enough, but I don't think honestly, I don't think it's unreasonable. But we have Tibetans over here, okay? They might be a lot more qualified. To my understanding is that that's not an unreasonable petitioning, because I think in what's today's TAR, there was a part where the Panchen Lama is more powerful, and there's another part where the Dalai Lama was more powerful. So to me, it didn't look unreasonable, okay? But I don't want to defend it, okay? I'm just showing you those are the figures that the Chinese government, they have been using over 200 years. It's from a source that you have identified another questionable characteristic, okay? And again, I don't disagree with you. I also don't necessarily agree with you. All I'm saying is it's none of my business. It's not what I'm trying to
I
get.
just was interested to know if there was any gender composition available at that time.
General what?
Gender composition of the...
Gender, no. No. For all of China, yes. Not for Tibet. Yeah, because if you look at the figures, okay, for the Shanxi province and whatever, yes, they will tell you. Actually, they will tell you total individuals, how many, and how many of them are women, how many of them are men, and then they also tell the household. There will be 2 separate figures. Individuals and households. Remember, for the border people, for the Bianming, only households. But for the Fuming, okay, the tummy people, okay, they have both the household people and the individuals, and then they then have men and women. Yes. they do. But for this, that's what they have. That's what they have. Okay, I'm just showing what they have. Okay, again. So I think this actually proves that the Chinese didn't have any reliable, credible source for the population figures. I think, again, subjectively, I think what happened was this. I think what happened was the author over here, anonymous, probably a Qing officer stationed in Tibet, and he probably got this information through unofficial means from the Tibetan government, okay, or some government officers, and so he wrote it down without revealing the true source. Now, actually, the book does claim that it was compiled and submitted to the Qing Empire Li Fan Yuan for inclusion into the unification record. Okay? So that is a source, except that it's now well recognized that it is incorrect because you go to the Qing unification record and there is no figure for Tibet. Okay? So this statement is definitely wrong. But the PLC capitalizes it by saying, there you see, the Tibetan government had to submit. But wait a minute, you can see this is very tricky. You know, the author says, this was compiled and submitted to the Li Fan Yuan. Who submitted it? It didn't say the Tibetan government submitted it, okay? It could be just a Qing official. Well, and there's no dispute the fact that the Qing Empire had people stationed in Tibet, okay? So compiled and submitted to Li Fan Yuan doesn't really mean that it was done by the Tibetan government, but what's more important is that it actually was never included in the unification record to begin with. Okay, any question? Now to answer your question. Before I go to that, again, I'm not defending anything, I'm just showing you records, okay? But as a background, I think all of you know that one of the major justifications of the liberation of Tibet by the PRC is to liberate the serfs, right? I'm sure you've all heard of that, okay? Okay, we all taught, particularly Chinese are taught that, you know, there are all these serfs, they're exploited by the Dalai Lama and his clique, and then there are just all these serfs, okay? How do you know that there are all these serfs, and there are many of these serfs, okay? That is actually only one evidence that the PRC has produced that involves numbers. Because when you say many, are you talking about 2% or 98%? Okay, I mean, so this figure, okay, I don't know, those of you who can read Chinese, do you know who Hon-Shiang is? Okay, it's the premier, it's a forefront Tibetan scholar of the PRC, okay? And this book, Biographies of Dalai Lama, was actually written as an internal publication for the education of the national officers, okay, the cadres of China, okay? It was an internal publication, and it was considered as so authoritative that Premier Zhou Enlai personally ordered that it be published to the public. And then after that, it was translated into Tibetan, Mongolian, English, and German, okay? And it's widely cited not only in China, but throughout the world by the Westerners, okay? Because it was published, you know, in English and German, okay? So this is the most authoritative, sort of a recent publication, and they have this figures over here on the serfs. And this is the only pre-1949 numerical evidence that the PRC can produce. And that's now to answer your question. It says, according to what is reported in the record of Holy Conquest, and that's the reason why in this handout I already shown you the slide earlier, okay? The slide of the record of Holy Conquest was shown earlier, but right now that passage is given as extract 2. Okay, I'm reproducing it, okay, so that you can check. So in the biographies of Dalai Lamas, this Hon-Shiang, which is again, as I say, the topmost expert in Tibet affairs, claims that in the record of Holy Conquest, about the figures submitted in 1733 by the 5th Dalai Lama. I'm going to embarrass some of the Tibetans over here. Do you know when did the Dalai Lama of the 5th die? That's a fair question. This is the first funny part. I mean, this whole passage is just so ridiculously funny that I don't know how this could sort of come about. I mean, if you look at, I couldn't find another word for it, is that of all the lies that are told by the PRC, this lie is about the funniest of that I've seen. First of all, the Dalai Lama died before this, okay? So it's no, you can go to the figures and see that the Dalai Lama was no more in 1733, okay? There's no way the Dalai Lama could have submitted it. And first of all, if you look at, because he quotes the record of conquest, if you look at the record of conquest, the record of conquest never claimed that it was submitted by the 5th Dalai Lama, and certainly not in year 1733. And then at that time, there were these main lamas belonged to the Dalai side and belonged to the Panchen side. So these two figures, as you can see, they do correspond. You look at this table once more. You look at this table. Look at this table, okay? And those numbers do correspond to that. Okay? And then, but then the author went on and said, the total number of serfs belonging to the monasteries were 128,190 households, among them those serfs that belong to Panchen side with so many households. And you can see that if you take this figure minus this figure, okay, then you get the serfs on a 121438. And so if you look at this 121438, you look at this 6752, again it's exactly the same as that, and that's the answer to your question. Ya Han Zhang just called these common people as serfs.
Professor, the year intrigues me because that is 1963. This was much after the Great Leap Forward and just before the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
So the term serfs, was it included by some diehard comrade?
No, because they are modern editions, okay? The most recent, it's being repeatedly cited, okay? In fact, I'll show you something else, okay? It's being repeatedly cited not only in China, but in the Western world. And the word serfs, nongnu, there's no ambiguity. Nongnu can, okay, the Chinese word used by the earlier writings were either 百姓 or 黑人. 黑人, for the Tibetans, actually you call them black people. And of course in Chinese we call it 前手. It's the same, actually. Chinese say black hate simply means ordinary people, as opposed to the monks with no hair. Okay? So the black hates, okay, or the black people means the 百姓, okay? And they cannot possibly be interpreted as serfs. Whereas over here, it means serfs. Okay? So that's the answer to your question. In other words, a very blunt answer to your question is that somebody obviously lied over here. Okay? And the fact that that lie could have perpetuated and be continued for all these decades, I just think it's amazing.
Professor, it is 5:30 now.
Yeah?
So far it has been an interactive session.
Okay, could you let me finish just one part over
yes,
here?
According to the schedule, now is the Q&A session.
Yeah, but I want to finish just one point.
Please.
Okay. This is to answer your question about how widely it is. And anyway, because I need to finish that. To arrive at the prevalence of serfdom in Tibet, this book not only comes up with these figures of serfs by simply naming these common people as serfs, and then he came up with this idea that each of those numbers is one serf that represents one household, and then there are 5 persons per household. So you multiply it by 5, and then they come up with 640,000 serfs. Okay, in other words, they convert the people's figure into the serf figure, multiply it by 5 by claiming that there are 5 persons per household, and then they get a total figure. And this is widely cited, so this is one example. Okay. So if you look at Tibet Daily News, okay, 2009 page, if you go to Dushu, you search through that, you just, actually all you would do is to type in Chinese, okay, 6752 households of serfs, okay, and there will be, you go to Dushu, the database, there'll be just so many books that they're still being cited to this day, okay? And so this is a common citation, okay? Poor thing. these 640,000 serfs not only had to serve and provide for more than 300,000 lamas without compensation, people like you get all the free service. Sorry, I pressed the wrong one. They also had to shoulder all kinds of taxes and corvée imposed by the Tibet local government. Okay, so anyway, so I can stop over here and ask for questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. This is very comprehensive and detailed, and I'm completely confused. One thing is, where the Chinese people migrated from where? In the beginning. And the Indian too. Someone says China came from Africa, and China is a Peking man, and they have migrated to Bering Strait to all Americas, and the white people can butcher them like animal. So all these things, and then before the Ming dynasty, which dynasty was there and going on? And second,
Yuan Mingqing. Yuan dynasty preceded Ming.
And then the South Asian group, like Nepal, Bhutan, Nagas, and Mizos, up to Singapore. All this region, Mao Zedong said it is Chinese. What is your proof?
No, I don't want to touch on that question because it's way too complicated and it's not the purpose of my talk. Well, we all know that, no, shouldn't we all know that? People like us were told by scientists that we all come from the same ancestor, which is this woman in Africa, Lucy, right? Yeah. So again, you know, I mean, why have different nations, why have different languages, okay? So, I mean, but those things have nothing to do with us. Okay, you look at, for example, you can argue that the Jews and the Arabs, they're all descendants of Abraham, okay? If you know about the biblical tradition, the Western biblical tradition, okay? Why do the Muslims and the Jews, they won't define among themselves? They're all descendants of one person, Abraham, okay? And we all, then if you're Christians, you believe they're all descendants of Adam and Eve, okay, or Lucy as the case may be. But I don't know how relevant that is to what I'm talking about.
Last question. How do you tell to Xi Jinping and Modi about Tibetan's problem here in India by Dalai Lama?
That's not my research. My research has nothing to do with those things. In fact, I'm not interested in what the Tibetans should do, okay? What I'm trying to show are these records that, in my opinion, would prove to me that Tibet was never part of China. However, you can reach a different conclusion. I've really specifically mentioned yesterday, for example, that after having seen all the Ming Dynasty documents, a perfectly logical conclusion would be that the Ming Emperor and his officers were a whole bunch of separatists that are just as bad as the Dalai Lama, okay? You can conclude that, okay? I just ended up with the conclusion that I think probably these emperors are not that dumb, but you want to think that they're just evil people like Dalai Lama, it's not illogical, okay? So the same thing. Even if you reach my conclusion, and that is my conclusion being that Tibet was never part of China, and therefore the 1950 military action was not a unification. What I believe that it's not a unification, but it's an invasion, and it's really the taking over of another person's country. Does it mean that Tibet today should protest? Not necessarily. I mean, a lot of times when I go out and somebody hit me, you know, I'll just walk away because, I mean, you know, if I fight back, I'll probably be killed. Okay, so maybe the smartest thing to do if somebody hits you is just to be coward and walk away. I have nothing to do with this. I'm just showing you the historical records. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other question? What should we do now, sir?
What about aristocracy?
What?
Aristocracy.
Well, actually, that's interesting. That's interesting. Is that you look at those figures?
Aristocracy.
They have only two groups of people. The original records had the lamas and the Baixing, the ordinary people, and Ya Hanzang changed it into the lamas and then the serfs. Okay. What about people like you see the what you call the exploitation class? Okay, and there's no record for that. In other words, those records, they are really very sloppy, and it's an insult to Chinese culture because if you look at China proper, the Chinese government, they would not have such sloppy records. They would have very, very good records. In other words, to try to use those records to reflect sort of Tibetan population, one way to interpret it is that if this is really what China had, it's a very bad reflection on Chinese sort of administrative sophistication, which is what I was trying to show earlier. Remember, I showed you that all these years, okay, every 4 or 5 years, they will have very detailed records, down to the last digit. So yeah, but the short answer is that that's all they have. And that is it. And you can see, so my proof is that they couldn't possibly have better records because Ya Hanzang had to use that same set of records that came out in 1750. And when the Chinese Communist Party, they had to fabricate figures for the serfs, okay, or rather the prevalence of serfdom, again, they have to go back to the same set of figures and then change the name, the term common people to serfs. To me, that is clear-cut proof that they have no other set of figures. Which is a little bit, I think, a little bit surprising to me. And that is, I would think that if you tell lies, you can tell better lies. But this is a really very, very poorly constructed lie. That's what I'm trying to.
Professor, to confuse you a bit, in Chinese, 0 is called Ling. And 0 was India's contribution to mathematics and geometry.
Yeah.
So should India have claimed a patent on it? Because all software is with ones and zeros.
I don't know why. I mean, we are using, H2O, E equals to mc squared. They're all sort of discovered by scientists in the Western world. Okay, a lot of these things are discovered by one group of people, and then they are used throughout the world. That's why human beings have advanced through the ages beyond the animals and the dinosaurs. If the Indians want to claim this what you call credit for 0, China will claim credit for tea leaves, and then for a person like me with an engineering background, my goodness, I mean, all the textbooks that I've read, all the names are either German or Anglo-Saxon or whatever, and then so I mean, every time we say H2O or whatever.
Patents are for the new invention.
Pardon?
Patents are for the new inventions. Those are quite old.
Yeah. No, but a lot of new things that are invented, so to speak, that are discovered, that are immediately made to be made available to the entire world. That's what we do as professors. That's what we do as professors. We do things for free. Just like the research over here that I'm doing it for free. That's what I mean, American professors, I don't know about professors in other countries. I mean, American professors are brought up to believe that you do these things, you publish it, and it's for free use without claiming credit for the United States or for your ethnic group. That's my view.
So all these facts and figures that have been shown,
Yeah.
I was quite surprised that India is almost missing. Where does India figure in? All those border countries, everything is there.
India, I have excluded
curious.
India, not purposely, but it's because it's irrelevant to my topic. Actually, if you look at all these lists of tributary countries, these are foreign countries, there is, and if you remember, I did show Tibet once. If you remember, but it's just simply it's irrelevant to our discussion. Remember, I showed you this one. This is India. India is ranked right behind Tibet. So it's an example where Tibet, but you see, I mean, I'm talking about these records with a listing of hundreds of countries, and I think for my purpose, it's more meaningful to show a tributary country like England rather than a tributary country like India. Because if I show people that China claims India to be a tributary, of course it's not true, but it's not as laughable as showing that China claims that Britain was a tributary country, or for that matter, like the Netherlands. So that's the reason why I've got. Now, if you look at this thing, by the way, if you look at this book, the one that was published in the Qing Dynasty, that was selected by the 四库全书未收书籍, okay? You can see that even they didn't mention India, okay? They mentioned Laos, Siam, and this is the Philippines, Holland, and the countries in the Western Ocean would be Italy, Portugal, but there's no mention of India. It's not my fault. Again, I'm not trying to defend them, but it actually, India was I think my guess is that China had more trade and more interaction with countries like Vietnam, okay, and even the Dutch and the Portuguese than the Indians.
Cultural exchange. I mean, Buddhism travel, all the texts were taken from India.
You're right.
There was cultural
I
exchange.
have no explanation, and again, I'm not an expert on that. I have no explanation for that phenomenon. It's just that if you look at most of these books, they will mention Malacca, they will mention Borneo, they will mention Cambodia, and they will mention England, okay? England actually, of course, even before the Opium War, it appeared many times because they sent envoys. I don't think India actually sent envoys. Now that you mention it, I'm not 100% sure, but if you ask me for a split-second reaction, I don't remember actually having read records of. Well, first of all, you remember there was no such thing as India at that time. It was divided into many principalities, ruled by the Rajas and Maharajas and so forth, okay? My guess was that none of these Maharajas were really big enough or influential enough to send envoys to China. Because at that time, if you want to send envoys to China from India, you cannot go through Tibet, okay? You have to go around, okay, to, the ocean way, and then.
What is
So,
Western Ocean?
What's that?
Western Ocean. What does it mean?
Well,
Western Ocean.
that's the name they use, and I'm telling that the Western Ocean, the author eventually describes that as Italy, Portugal, and England.
Is it Atlantic Ocean?
I don't know what the author means. Again, okay. In Chinese, it's called 西洋国, okay? I'm just directly translating the Chinese manuscript. It says 西洋国, so I say Western Ocean, okay? Does that Western Ocean mean that Atlantic Ocean or what? I haven't the slightest idea. The reason is this. If they're talking about Portugal, I don't even know whether they're talking about the Portugal in Europe or the Macau in China. I haven't the slightest idea. I think I've explained, this Holland, it definitely doesn't mean the Netherlands in Europe. This Holland, I am 99% sure it refers to what is today Indonesia. Okay?
Who draw the map of the world? We do not concern Chinese or Indian.
I'm sorry, say that once more.
Who draw the world map?
A lot of people drew maps. There are thousands of people through the ages that drew maps of different countries. I can draw a map, okay? Anybody can draw a map. But I have tried to use maps that are printed by the most authoritative bodies, okay? Not any Tom, Dick, and Harry, but anybody can draw a map. If you look at these stores of antiques, they will have all kinds of maps, okay? They're drawn 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago by all kinds of artists, okay? Anybody can draw a map. You buy a piece of paper and you can draw a map. But is it a map published by a reliable source that is authoritative? And I have limited myself to maps that are produced by or commissioned by, for example, the Ming Emperor or the Qing Emperor. That's all. Were they necessarily correct? No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that, hey, if you don't believe in the emperor's version of his empire, then what are you going to believe? That's all. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you for the informative talk, Professor.
Yeah.
I wasn't here yesterday, so I don't know if it was discussed already. But I was interested in knowing what has the response been to your research from the Chinese academia or, say, official sources, because whenever research like this comes out, say when the UN rejected China's claim of the 9-line, 11-line, they just outrightly reject it. But here you're showing internal inconsistencies which challenge their own official records, so I was just interested.
Well, my book is going to come out next week. I'll see what happens after that. My guess is that actually I've given presentations and I understand that they know about my presentations. They're aware of what, because I have given similar presentations in the past 3 years, okay? Among them, one in Brussels, okay, which is by the, organized by the Central Tibetan Administration, and then several others, okay, in Taiwan and other parts of Europe, and Oxford University and so forth. And actually, I'm aware of the fact that they're aware of what I'm doing, okay? They have actually been very quiet. Now, honestly, there are two possible explanations. One is that I'm so insignificant that they don't want to waste your time to address it. They just think that it's just a mad person, just talking rubbish. I would like to believe that there is a second explanation. The second explanation being that if I were in the position, I'd prefer to ignore me. In other words, if somebody presents evidence like that you cannot refute, the best way is to ignore it. And I hope that's the reason. But it could be the other one. It could be that I'm just overestimating myself, and that they just think that I'm crazy. Okay? But my book will come out next week. But unfortunately, the book is published in the Fanti, okay, in the sort of the Taiwan script. But eventually, it'll be converted into the simplified script, and then it'll be made available to the mainland Chinese. I don't know how it'll be available to the mainland Chinese, because I'm sure the book will be banned anyway. But an electronic copy, I think, I assume that maybe Tibetans will probably email them inside China. Okay.
Professor,
Yeah.
Do you
It
really
is-
believe that your presentations, paper, documents, etc., has been read by both Mao Zedong and Dalai Lama
Mao Zedong is dead?
before?
What do you mean? My manuscript just appeared recently. How come?
Qing dynasty, he was alive. After that, he came out, but he died, no doubt. But what do you mean, during his time, has he gone through all your records or not?
I don't know. No. If you ask me personally, I'm sure many of the Chinese scholars and many people in the Chinese government, they are aware of this. Okay? It's just they prefer not to tell people, and they just try to cover it up. I'm not saying that I'm the first Chinese who have discovered it. I mean, these things have been printed again. I've been stressing all the time. They have been printed. They have been made available in the websites for free, in the internet, and so forth. Obviously, I'm not the only Chinese who have read it, but I'm one of the first Chinese that are pointing up publicly that, hey, wait a minute, there are these things. And the reason why I am able to do that is, again, I have explained it at the very beginning of my talk, is that number one, I'm retired. Number two, I'm an American citizen. Number three, I live in the United States. Number four, I'm independently, that I have independent income, so to speak. Okay, I don't have a job. Okay, number four, and number six, okay, as again, I pay for my expenses, my airfare, and whatever is that. Basically, I can say whatever I want. But most people can't afford to do that. If you're a professor working in an American and Chinese university in Chinese studies, if you do what I'm doing, you lose your job.